Attorney General William Barr's efforts to intervene in the criminal case against Trump ally Roger Stone is sparking new outrage today. In fact, more than 1,100 former Justice Department officials from both parties have signed a statement urging Barr to resign as Attorney General. Joining me now is one of those former officials who has signed that letter, former federal prosecutor and assistant U.S. Attorney Nelson Cunningham. With a welcome to you, why did you sign this letter and how significant is this? I mean, the numbers, Nelson, are growing by the hour. I mean, right now it's, I think, at 1,143 signatures. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, look, one of the most important norms we have is that our Justice Department prosecutes based on the evidence and on established policy. This is what, for 200 years, has given the American people the comfort that we will not prosecute people for political purposes and we won't let people off the hook for political purposes. There is a strict protocol that's been around at least 40 years that governs contacts between the White House and the Department of Justice precisely to limit White House influence on the career prosecutors at the Department of Justice who bring these cases. I was hired by Rudy Giuliani. I served under Ronald Reagan. I served under George H.W. Bush and the first year of the Clinton administration. We never discussed politics in the office in New York, and that's the way it should be.
I've heard a lot of people say, including on this broadcast yesterday, that Bill Barr's reputation is permanently tarnished. What do you think of that?
Well, I served under Bill Barr the last time when he was Attorney General as a very young man, and we all thought that he acquitted himself very, very well in that job. When he was given the appointment of Attorney General last year to replace Jeff Sessions, I was one of those who applauded it because of his reputation for being a fair, balanced, conservative, but mainstream legal figure. He has really disappointed those who thought that he would be focused on the impartial adjudication that we expect from attorneys general.
So essentially, he has not lived up to your expectations. He has not lived up to the support that you gave him.
No, he is not. Look at the newspapers today, which are full of quotes. This is the New York Times and the Washington Post and others, full of quotes of current and former prosecutors, especially the current prosecutors in offices all around the country who are worried the cases they are working on will be influenced by the attorney general channeling the president. That's outrageous.
Look, to be specific here, you have the Washington Post, which is reporting that there are concerns among officials that leadership is putting aside all of their duties to just please the president by reviewing cases that he's personally or politically invested in. Do you have any understanding as to why top leadership is associating themselves with this kind of focus? And are you concerned it's for retribution?
Well, retribution is certainly a worry after we saw what President Trump did after his acquittal by the Senate, when he immediately began punishing the career and even political people that he had appointed who had testified under oath in the impeachment matter. He did not wait more than 48 hours before imposing restrictions. You know, I fear in a second Trump term, when he no longer worries about the voters and he no longer worries about impeachment from a Senate that has so many Republicans, what limits will there be on the president's intervention into the workings of the Department of Justice? I think that's a terrible prospect.
Yeah, I think many would agree with you, Nelson Cunningham. Thank you so much.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.